ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا فمن يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله ثم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. It is a great honor, a great privilege as always to be with all of you. Of course, I have the singular distinction of having the worst audio-visual setup of any teacher currently using Zoom, and it's a distinction that I wear very proudly. It's a distinction that I wear very proudly. But mashallah, this is a critical. Before I continue, Rana, how is my audio?
You sound clear.
Okay, it's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So before I go on onto some other node of discussion, I understood that we only had a few people take the survey in terms of what we would discuss this week, and I understood that the most votes went to continuing with the marriage Q&A. So if anybody has a question, insight, comment, idea, concern, now is the time to voice those. If not, I could let you in on the new article that I should be releasing I should be publishing on the Alim website tomorrow. And it's about the topic of Muslim women marrying non-Muslim men. And so it's kind of be interesting to get some feedback on it. But do you guys have anything?
I would love to hear it.
Well, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Well, let's see. I could. Well, I won't. I'll spare you the. Nothing is drier than listening to somebody read a paper. So I'll spare you that boredom. But suffice it to say, I'm looking at this traditional ruling. Of course, the traditional ruling is that Muslim women are prohibited, are not permitted to marry non-Muslim men, and Muslim men have been granted a special allowance in that regard to marry non-Muslim women, Christian and Jewish women. And I wanted to go into some of the books to look at what the basis for this a ruling that expresses such a clear gender bias would, to my mind, be worthy of an explanation. Like, how, if it's something that is spiritually harmful to be in a romantic marital partnership with someone of a different faith tradition, one would assume that men are just as worthy of being protected from something spiritually harmful or damaging as women are. Or is this prohibition thought of in a way that is particular to women? And if it is thought of in a way that is particular to women, meaning there is some spiritual harm that we're trying to protect against that women are uniquely exposed to through an interreligious marriage, then what exactly is the nature of that harm? And I was surprised that beyond this vague sense that it was something that would place a Muslim woman in a precarious position with regard to the free exercise of her religion, I really could not find anything else. It's meaning the nature of that precariousness was never really spelled out. It's just like treat it like, the way I termed it in the article, and I feel totally corny quoting myself, but nobody spoke up and asked a question. So what do you want me to do? Yeah, the way I addressed it in the article is I said, classical scholars seem to take something for granted, meaning like there is something about this arrangement that places a Muslim woman in a precarious situation with regard to practicing her deen. There's something that is a given, and then modern scholars just agreed that there is something that is a given. And then, I mentioned that, many Muslim women in our community are beginning to ask, or are beginning to challenge this ruling. And they're beginning to ask, what is the something? Meaning, what is this thing that exposes me to great spiritual harm if I am in an interreligious partnership? And I mentioned that, although we are kind of in a context in which, Islam in particular, and I think revealed religion in general, is kind of being bombarded by philosophical liberalism, we still must treat the questions, critical insights, concerns of Muslim women with respect and integrity. That a woman who asks a question that is an affront to precedent, or an affront to tradition, or an affront to, or a challenge to those things, perhaps not an affront, but a challenge to those things, is not involved in some covert or unwitting attempt to destroy traditional Islam, is not trying to short circuit the religious tradition. Rather, she is most likely, because she's asking, trying to gain some understanding of, the reasons and rationales which serve as the basis for something that is a part of her religious commitment. And we kind of go from there. And I look at three potential, because again, I really don't find a lot concerning the nature of the risk a Muslim woman is exposed to being married to a non-Muslim man. And what I did find, really, it was surprisingly, limited. And I found three major kind of streams of thinking. And I guess what I found, I could place under three separate rubrics. One, the idea that it's not about gender primarily, which was actually the most surprising and kind of refreshing finding in this short little research article, is that it's not about the gender. The difference is not the gender. The difference is actually what the respective religious communities teach regarding tolerance. And you found Muslim scholars saying, well, a Christian or Jewish woman enjoys legal protection under the laws of Islam to practice her religion, and she enjoys at least a modicum of respect for her prophets and religious tradition, because the Muslim believes that her religion comes out of an authentically prophetic tradition. He just believes that she has failed to accept the messengership of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But he does not believe her religious tradition to be based on complete nonsense. He actually believes that she is following authentic prophets, Moses, Jesus, and he has restriction in the Sharia that he cannot compel her to be a Muslim. La ikraha fi din. He cannot compel her to be a Muslim. So she enjoys a protection for kind of the free exercise of her religion if she's married to a Muslim man. A Muslim woman, on the other hand, is assumed to not enjoy that same guarantee of tolerance, that same guarantee of the appreciation of her prophet and her religious tradition. I guess those scholars concluded that the Christian or Jewish man must necessarily see her prophet as a charlatan and see her religious tradition as baseless. And they did not find anything in those religious traditions that made those men obliged to respect her religious practice and commitment. And this is the thing that would place her in kind of a precarious situation if she's a Muslim being married to a non-Muslim man. The second thing, wait, was that first? Because I'm gonna say at the end that all of these, of course, are not 100% compelling, in our context, and that's kind of my. But this is kind of my. I'm leading up here. Is everybody still with me though? At least with that first point.
Yes.
Okay. And then the second reason was that it is about gender. It is about gender, but it's not about like gender as expressed in like essential masculinity or essential femininity. It's, the second view is it's not that it's something essential to masculinity or essential to femininity that makes a Muslim woman, endangered if she's trying to practice her religion while married to a non-Muslim man, but rather it's based on socially contingent roles that the Quran envisions marriage as, a partnership and a bond in which the husband has the role of providing kind of the primary security, the primary comfort upon which their religious lives are built. And women are expected to make their contributions to family. And I mentioned in the article that the contributions that women make to family are by consensus qualitatively more important than the base that the men provide. But the base is still the base. And the nature of a base is that what is built on top of a base delimits and determines the character of what, or the base itself delimits and determines the character of what can be built on top of it. So for instance, if the husband decides to, own vineyards and sell wine, and how can the Muslim woman build her religious life on top of that base? Or if the husband decides, if just by virtue of his being a husband in the assumption of classical scholars, meaning this is what they assume the husband's role to be, that if he's a husband, he will have the ability to set the terms of family, meaning with his profession, with regard to certain guidelines, certain rules, certain restrictions, certain regulations. He'll have the ability to just set the terms of family in a way that could leave the Muslim woman in a precarious position with regard to her ability to practice her deen. And the example that I gave was just one of many examples that could be given. What if, because Allah mentions, in the Quran in terms of kind of the ideal of marriage, women are assisting, I actually mentioned in the article that, when we hear about the compliance of women with men, some of us, a'udhu billah, we think about like women being obedient to men about like minute details, him telling her do this and do that and do this. If you look at the Quranic verse, it only mentions that, women contribute. Women are working on the same accord as men with regard to the family. And this is why at the end of the verse, Allah mentions and that they guard in their husband's absence what they have been entrusted with. Meaning, this is the way their family is being structured. She will be called upon to contribute to that structuring of the family, to guard, their collective interests, etc. And that if the husband is not Muslim and he sets the terms of family in ways that are antithetical to kind of Muslim religious practice, this will leave the woman in a very precarious position. And then the third reason is that there is something essential, that there is something immutable, something essential to masculinity, something essential to femininity that makes it dangerous, makes it precarious for a Muslim woman to be married to a non-Muslim man. And I did mention that, this is likely to be the least compelling of arguments in our context because, it's just an argument in very bad company. And there's a French sociologist named Robert Hertz that mentioned that every kind of toxic social hierarchy claims to be based on the nature of things, meaning this is just the way that it is, right? And in that way, it affords to itself eternity, meaning this is kind of the essential and eternal way that masculinity functions, the essential and eternal way that femininity functions. And because of those essential and eternal ways, a Muslim woman could not be married to a non-Muslim man. And I mentioned that would be very unpopular because every self-serving, other obliterating, toxic ideology, scientific theory, idea, belief has claimed, has cited natural differences. See, it's the natural differences between Black people and white people, the natural differences between men and women that have led to great injustice. I said, but to my mind, the most effective way to challenge toxic hierarchies is not by affirming the positive value of the characteristics of the people at the top and then showing that we're that way too. It's not. Rather, it's through taking honest stock of oneself. What am I really? And then affirming the positive value of your distinctiveness. Meaning there are some things that we are actually alike and some things that we are actually different about, but that does not make me inferior, in any way. And I said, in that regard, Muslim women will have to just take stock of themselves. And when doing that, they may recognize that, like, for instance, the idea that women are so predisposed to following the example of their husbands that just the fact of marrying a non-Muslim woman, a non-Muslim man, is going to make a woman lose her faith in God and his messenger. Most women would recognize that as being something false. That's demonstrably false. However, the idea that women derive more satisfaction from activities in families done collectively, and they experience more adverse effects from activities not done collectively in families than men do, something like that might be relevant. And I state that, very non-declaratively because I can't, I'm not the one taking stock. But what I mean by that is that for a man to be in a family and be the only one going to pray Salat al-Eid is less consequential. Maybe this is the idea, right? Is less consequential to him as a Muslim than a woman being the only member of a family that's going out to pray Salat al-Eid. That might be much more consequential to her. And you actually have some studies that prove that whenever there's a situation in which you have a group and then you have an individual with khasa'is, an individual with kind of special characteristics, women are much more willing to relinquish or sacrifice their particular and individual characteristics, specificities, needs for the sake of the group than men are, you see. And that could be what is understood by kind of essential differences that make women being in that situation precarious, in the minds of classical scholars. And then I mentioned, because I only get 1,500 words, anything, they say the general rule of thumb, anything over 1,500 words is never read on the internet. But the way that I wrap the article is clearly one can see that, holes can be poked, in all of these, in all of these rationales. If these are rationales for that ruling, holes can be poked in all of them. None of them are, none of them are irrefutable. And some of them are just downright not compelling. So what you're really dealing with there, as far as my read, is, something concerning which Muslim tradition has been unanimous, for a very long time. If one chooses to accept that this position is this position because of a wisdom known to God, and not question it, that is an option available to one. If one wants to look at kind of the why for a ruling like this, and then see where that why applies to them or doesn't apply to them individually, then that would also appear to me to be something that is open to them, and that's kind of where I got. So what do you guys think?
Assalamualaikum.
Yeah,
I was actually very curious about this topic in general. And I do appreciate what you said, because it gives you a different light versus just hearing from people be like, it's haram, it's wrong, you can't do it. So I do appreciate it. But I guess it's really hard to grasp when you hear like, and I know last week we did talk a little bit about men being allowed and women are not. But I do like to do my own research as well. And I'm just curious because I've looked at like Surah Maida and I've seen the verse. And I may have missed it because I joined class late, but is there more on why is it that the Quran is silent on women? Surah Maida, the verse is like, you can eat the meat of the people of the book, and the men are allowed to marry with people from people of the book, but it doesn't say anything for women, yes or no. Like it's like a little bit more on that, if that's possible. Get a little bit more.
Yeah. So there's a verse in Surah Al-Mumtahana that mentions that these women are not lawful wives for the disbelievers, and the disbelievers are not lawful husbands for them. Now, this verse was revealed about recent Muslim immigrants to Medina that were still married to Meccan polytheists. But the general rule of thumb in Islamic law is that a text is interpretive consideration within a text is given not to the particular circumstance that gave rise to that occasions the text, but rather to the general rule being stated in the text. So the general rule states that Muslim women are not permitted to marry disbelievers. And disbelievers are not, of course, permitted to marry them. And that is actually understood to refer to Muslim women and Muslim men. And then Muslim men are just given a special allowance to marry Jewish and Christian women specifically. But the vast majority of, it's like, how can I say this? It's like, I think about it as like an exception. Like Muslim men cannot marry disbelieving women, but there's an exception given to Christian women and Jewish women. But all like a Muslim man, at least according to Sharia, cannot in terms of Islamic law, be married to a Hindu woman or a Buddhist woman or an atheist woman or a humanist woman. There's a special consideration given to just Christian and Jewish women. And then I go into, why, whenever I looked for like a basis, why is this allowance extended to men, but the allowance is not extended to women? I kept bumping into this idea that, well, it would endanger a woman. It would put her in a precarious position with regard to the practice of her, of her faith. And so I was trying to kind of really go in and kind of like excavate what is the nature of the precariousness here, like precarious how. And so I found just a few things in terms of why this is precarious. And I end up mentioning that I could totally see how this wouldn't be very compelling to some people, right? Some people wouldn't regard those things as compelling, and it wouldn't be precarious at all to them. But then, I mentioned that the option of kind of accepting this on the basis of, look, it's in the Quran, I don't understand it, but I accept it. That is an option. And then saying, no, it's a ruling. It should have a basis that I can understand, right? It's not like a ruling in worship where it's like Maghrib is 3 units of prayer. I don't understand why, but I just do it, right? This is a ruling that should have a basis. I don't understand its basis. And I mean, I guess that would lead someone to a place where they could explore kind of how they wanted to engage, that ruling.
Right. And then just like a follow-up question, I guess, is so if a man does choose to convert because of this reason, and you hear a lot of people say, well, that's not really like true conversion, right? Like they're not actually converting for the right reasons. I guess just what is your take on that? Because I do hear that from a lot of people that like he didn't really convert, he converted for his wife, and so he's not really Muslim. But if he does the Shahada, it doesn't not necessarily mean that he is a Muslim.
Well, generally speaking, the law has limits. The law has limits. Law will always have limits. So if someone outwardly professes to be Muslim, then we don't have any basis to question that profession of faith. Like if someone says I'm Muslim, I can't say, well, you're really not Muslim. I mean, I can't, if a person says I'm a Muslim or a person takes their Shahada, that's about as far as we can go. Now, in terms of whether or not faith is really in their heart, this is something that is known to God. If they know, I really just did this so that I could marry you and your family would be okay with it and it wouldn't be a problem. But I really, really don't believe what I said. That would be, now if they say that aloud, like they actually say, I'm not really Muslim, if they actually say, then they have, in a sense, overtly and publicly recanted their Shahada, in which case they would become a non-Muslim again. But if it's something that they hold in their heart, like they know in their heart, I'm really not Muslim, but I just did that so that we could be together. But they never mention otherwise. Outwardly, the person is a Muslim, and outwardly that woman is married to a Muslim and not doing anything. She's not doing anything wrong. She's married to someone who is a Muslim. And it's just like if somebody says that they're Muslim, the outward demand of the law has been satisfied. In terms of kind of their inward spiritual state, human beings really don't have access to that. Sayyidina Umar, he famously said, "Umirna an nahkum ala dhahir." We have been commanded to judge things according to their outward import. I mean, that's all I can see. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if you really are. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? But if you say that you are, then I'm obliged to treat you as though you are. If you say that you are, then I guess you are. You know what I'm saying? But whether or not you're really Muslim, that will be determined by your belief and your actions. But if somebody, actually, funny story, there was a middle-aged white American man who was studying Arabic with me in Yemen. I was studying Arabic and he was studying Arabic. And of course, one day after class, we were talking and I said, how did you wind up? Because he was actually kind of ascending the corporate ladder. He was like, he was a pretty well-heeled, well-to-do exec at some firm. And I said, you had a nice life, beautiful home, you are married. How did you end up staying in this dingy dorm with me in Yemen? You know what I'm saying? How did you wind up here with me? You know what I'm saying? And he said that he was on business in Saudi Arabia, and he met a Saudi woman, and he fell in love with her. And she said she wasn't religious at all. And he said that she said, just pretend to be Muslim so that we can get married, right? Just pretend to be, like, you don't have to really be Muslim. Just pretend to be Muslim so that we can get married. And these are his exact words. He said, what do I have to do? Because he was thinking that it would require, and she said, nothing. You just got to say, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And he thought, well, I mean, that's not going to kill me. You know what I'm saying? He said, okay, that's not going to kill me, right? So he said, I accepted Islam, and I married her. And we went back to the US. And we were living in the Virginia. They were living in the tri-state area. And he said that he was coming back from a lunch, and it was Friday. And he saw people going into a mosque. And he said that he just thought to himself, I could go in there because I am a Muslim. He just said that, if I wanted to, I could really walk in there. He said he had never been in a masjid in his life. He just said, if I wanted to, nobody could stop me from going in there because on paper, I'm a Muslim, right? So he said that he got close to the door and he thought, what if I just walked in here? He just said, what the hell, why not? Right? So he walks into the mosque. He said he has no idea of how anything goes there. He's like looking around, and he said he sees people taking off their shoes, so he took off his shoes. He sees people like just sitting down listening, so he sat down and he started listening. And he said it just so happened that Friday the guest khatib was Imam Zayd Shakir, right? And he was listening, and he said that he didn't leave thinking, like, oh my God, I'm so convinced. But he at least thought, wow, it's it is a little interesting. Like, some things were said that I guess, piqued his curiosity. Like, that's kind of interesting. You know what I'm saying? So he went home and he went on Amazon, he ordered a copy of the Quran, and then he started reading it. And he said, a couple months, he was like, I mean, I don't really have to become Muslim because I already am Muslim. You know what I'm saying? But I'm kind of, I feel like maybe I want to start, making some effort on this. And he said that his wife was actually opposing him. Like, what are you doing? No, you don't have to do this. And she was actually saying, no, we just did that for my family. That wasn't real. That like, you're taking this too far. Like, you didn't really have to do that. It's not that kind of thing, And cut a long story short, he ended up really falling in love with the religion, kind of really embracing it for himself. And he was taking a year-long sabbatical from business to actually learn Arabic in Yemen. So sometimes people start out like, yeah, I mean, I'm doing this for love. And then, they end up, very committed and very dedicated. So, that story came to mind, mashallah. I wonder where he is now. I haven't seen him in years. But he was a beautiful brother, mashallah. Beautiful brother, mashallah. Alhamdulillah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Alhamdulillah. Other questions?
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi ala.
Yes. So I appreciate how you broke it down, the 3 different buckets. And at the end, you gave a very politically correct sort of caveat, like maybe based on individual circumstances, one might consider like, do these apply to them, or is there, so I guess in your analysis and even just now reflecting on these things, like, could you conjure an example of a situation where perhaps those conditions would not apply to a Muslim woman, where you would think it's appropriate or maybe acceptable Islamically for her to be in a relationship with a non-Muslim man?
You know, for me, it's very difficult because it's kind of like the collective weight, and this is where I just have to own my own kind of religious conservatism. Like I just have to own my own religious conservatism. Like for me, it's the, you know, as somebody thinking about these things, I'm putting a, you know, a pen to paper and trying to provide, you know, some food for thought. As somebody practicing Islam, for me, the collective weight of all of them is enough for me to suggest, I don't, it would be, I would be reluctant myself. In fact, I would even go as far as to say I would be unwilling myself to participate in a ceremony in which a Muslim woman was marrying a non-Muslim man, myself. You know what I'm saying? But I do know of different scholars that have mentioned, like I've seen two different positions. One scholar, he mentioned that he just straight up said, I don't think the basis of this ruling, if it's looking at some kind of difference in gender, I don't think it's relevant anymore. I think Khalid Abu al-Fadl from UCLA, he just like straight up said, I think we can say that a Muslim woman marrying a non-Muslim man is makruh. It's something religiously reprehensible or disagreeable for those reasons. But I don't think that it's haram, because I don't think that these reasons would make it haram. And then Muhammad Fadl, who I think is more of a traditionalist, he said, well, I wouldn't be prepared to say that the general rule is that, you know, it's not haram, but maybe specific circumstances of women in particular kinds of, you know, positions that would give them the ability to practice their deen and have, you know, put in place, I guess, the safeguards and the allowances that would allow for the exercise of their religion to practice their faith. You know, maybe in some situation like that, you know, it could be allowable. Me personally, I just, you know, there's something about the kind of collective, you know, kind of the unanimity of traditional scholars on this point, and just the fact that it could be, there's a possibility that it could be for a wisdom that God knows that we don't quite understand. My own religious sensibility would probably stop at that, but I would respect if someone thought otherwise or believed otherwise, even if I thought they were wrong. Like I don't think that you're correct. I would not say that they were doing something for which there's absolutely, positively no basis in the religion. I wouldn't treat it as though you're doing something that is in clear violation of the nas of the Quran, like the outward import of a Quranic verse, and this makes you a disbeliever. I don't believe any of that. I don't think it's a, you know, if I were to put it in strict Islamic legal terms, I don't think it's an issue that doesn't allow for any difference of opinion. You know, some issues, they don't allow for any difference of opinion. Like if a person says, you know, kind of there's like two Allahs, we're not going to say, well, you know, that can be considered. No, that doesn't allow for any difference of opinion. If a person says, you know, 5 prayers are not really fard, it's really only 2. The other three are not obligatory. No. Something like this, I would not say there is no room for any disagreement. I would just say that I disagree on the issue, but I wouldn't say there's no possible conceivable way that any practicing Muslim of conscience could ever arrive at a different opinion than this. And I think that would be overstating it. But I would feel uncomfortable, with that. And I guess to your particular point, because that's my position, it would be hard for me to conjure a scenario in which that would be okay. But I'm sure that maybe someone else could, if that makes it clear. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I do understand. Jazakallah.
I have a question from somebody. So how do you advise a Muslim man to not convert to Christianity to marry a woman? The woman is Christian and does not want to convert and wants to raise the children as Christian.
Well, a man, I mean, he can, it's not even in kind of the classical tradition, it's not unlawful for him to marry her. I think, he has to, so meaning if he wants to marry her with her commitments, if he wants to marry her, he can. In terms of the children, it's actually one of the provisions of, Islamic law is that the children have to be raised Muslim. And that's one of the things that is difficult about this, because it's actually empirically shown now that in interreligious households, the children mostly take the religion of the mother. It's actually proven now that when the household is a mixed religious household, the children usually gravitate toward the religion of the mom. That is something that, a Muslim man that intends on raising Muslim children, or in this case, has an obligation to raise his children as Muslim children. That's something that he has to really, really think about. That's something that he really has to think about. He doesn't, I mean, of course, Islamically, the permissibility of the marriage is there, but he has to think about how much, I mean, really when we get away from some of the technical argument about this issue, what it really boils down to is, how much does this mean to you? How much does it really mean to you? Like, in your evaluation of your compatibility with the person, how much does this shared commitment in some form, meaning a shared commitment to Islam, how much does this really mean to you? Because, one thing that I've learned over the course of being married is that people getting married, they have a sense of what brought them together. They have a sense of what brought them together. It's, it could be, clearly, usually there's attraction, there's infatuation, there's sometimes love, there is, and by attraction, I mean more than physical attraction. I love a person's personality, I love their humor, I love their demeanor, I love their disposition, I love their intelligence. I'm attracted to them in a very deep and significant way, but they don't have as much understanding of what will keep them together. You see, and in my experience, a shared religious commitment is one of those things that keeps people together. You see, it's sometimes the fact that we're anchored, in this faith, in this, faith tradition and this commitment together with the ebbs and flows of relationships, sometimes it is the only thing, it is the only safeguard against us really momentarily losing touch with our commonality in certain, in certain ways. Sometimes the commonality of faith that, when my wife is really sick of me, she still recognizes that SOB is my Muslim brother. You know what I'm saying? That this punk, this jerk is my brother in Islam. That actually has, value at times. And I think people considering marriage don't think enough about, I don't think they realize that things can actually get to that place. You know what if I make myself clear.
Yeah, there was a little bit of a follow-up. So it's more that the female wants him to convert so they can get married in the church. So I think it's more about her wanting to.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, there's no, there's no Islamic ruling that would make it okay for him to leave Islam. Of course, that would be definitely out of the question. But in terms of him getting married in a church, I don't, as long as he doesn't say anything within the ceremony that is a violation of his, belief in Allah and His Messenger, I don't know that it would be prohibited for him to marry inside of a church. But in terms of his religious tradition, he would not be married until the Islamic conditions of marriage are fulfilled. So if he married in a church, according to her religious tradition, he would not be married to her until the conditions of his religious tradition were fulfilled. But in terms of his willingness to participate in the fulfillment of the conditions of her religious tradition, as long as the language was intentionally kind of like ecumenical, and we were just talking about God and this, I don't know why there would be any opposition to that. And see, this is kind of what that second argument was saying, is that for the Muslim that was marrying like a Christian woman, this really wouldn't present a problem, because the Muslim is going to talk about God, in which she also believes, right? She has a very specific theological understanding of God, perhaps, that is seen through Trinitarian Christianity, but she believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She believes in God. There's only one God. She believes in God. And so that if there was a Muslim ceremony in which God was being invoked, and the prophets of God were being invoked and being cited, that would not necessarily violate her religious tradition. But for the Muslim, if Jesus is being conflated with God, or if Maryam is being mentioned as the mother of God in the ceremony, this would be a clear, this would be a place where the Muslim, would not be able to engage that religious language in the same way. So Islam does kind of, I don't want to say benefit, but it is significant that Islam is chronologically last in terms of these religious traditions, if that makes any sense. Is anybody else getting all of these texts about voting tomorrow? So I like, I mean, they even gave the kids a day off from school. I'm like, man, they really want Trump out of there, man. They really, they even gave the kids a day off from school this year. This is going to be a very consequential election. I'm probably going to go to the bank during the day and just make sure that I have like cash on hand. This whole thing can get crazy, man. We'll see what happens, but of course we're praying for the best, inshallah. Other ideas, comments?
Hey, assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
I posted a question in the chat. I don't know if it was discussed yet, but it was basically like, I agree with the fact, like I understand why a Muslim woman wouldn't be able to understand or be able to marry a non-Muslim man. I agree with that. I mean, that's Islam. That's part of Islam for me. But then the other way around, like, wouldn't it be preferred for a Muslim man to marry a Muslim woman, and then a Christian or Jewish woman would be like last resort, like worst case scenario, like there's not, many Muslim women around kind of thing? Because like these days there's a lot of Muslim women who are unmarried, and it feels like there's disproportionately more as compared to men. So I feel like it's not even necessarily applicable if you look at it from that sense today.
Yeah, no, I think when I think about this allowance, I think about it as something that, as you mentioned, if this were to happen, where a Muslim man were to end up marrying a non-Muslim woman, a Christian or Jewish woman, that there is room for that, but that is certainly not the ideal. And it is the legal opinion that a Muslim man marrying other than a Muslim woman is something makruh. It is something disliked. It is something not preferred, for the reason that we have to. I find that when Allah Subhanahu wa Taala says that the believing men and the believing women are like protecting friends of one another, that they're protecting friends of one another. I find that, men and women that have a special kind of regard for each other want to see the comfort and the security provided by marriage, enjoyed by men and women in their community. It's almost like, when I think about, Muslim men, if they think deeply about what is entailed in being a husband, providing safety, providing security, and by safety I mean emotional, all kinds of safety, not just like beating people up, but providing safety, providing security, providing stability, providing companionship. I mean, these are things that are really, really important for people, and to my mind, it's just a sign of the healthiest of a healthy esteem for oneself, that you first want to see those things enjoyed by women or men kind of in your community. When a woman thinks about what a wife provides for a man, and it's incalculable. I really think that the woman's contribution to the man is more important than his contribution to her. It's just that in terms of in an ordinal way, his contribution is first, it's the basis of kind of their lives together. But that a woman would want to see those net goods go to a man in her community, I think is an extension of a healthy sense of self, to my mind. So yeah, I mean, we have to, even talking about this is dangerous because I don't want Muslims to think that, we should really be debating about whether or not we should be marrying outside of our community. We should really be encouraging each other to marry inside our community. So I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. Other ideas, comments? Alhamdulillah. Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, Ubayd. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I have a question kind of related to what we talked about last week.
Okay, bismillah.
I think we talked about how you would like kind of approach parents if they had like kind of cultural guidelines on who they wanted their child to marry, right? If and kind of you mentioned how you would kind of advocate for the child sometimes. I'm wondering if that's different if the parent has like Islamic or religious guidelines, if this person, if they say, okay, this person has to, pray 5 times a day, or if regarding what this person might wear, for example, or things like that, how do you kind of navigate that with your parents?
That's a much more that's much more difficult to navigate, only because here we're not talking about something arbitrary like ethnicity or skin color. We're talking about the person's behavior. We're talking about, their conscious decision. So if a person, wants to marry somebody and they are, say, a consumer of alcohol, and the woman's father says, there's no way my daughter is going to marry someone who drinks. It's going to be very difficult for me to say, well, I mean, it's not so bad. I mean, she could be with a guy who drinks and not be married to him. I mean, that's going to be a tough argument. That's going to be a tough argument, to make. Good religious standing is understood, at least on the basis of like Islamic law. That is one of the substantive reasons that somebody's parents could reject a proposal. Like he's not a good man. Like, why, this man has requested this woman's hand or is asking this woman's hand in marriage, and her dad is like, no, why not? Because he's not a good Muslim. Right? He's not an upstanding member of our community. That's actually regarded as quite a substantive charge. On the other hand, if it is more gray than that, meaning we're not talking like, she's a good girl, Dad. She just snorts a couple lines of cocaine at parties, just at parties. It's just at parties, Dad. No, but we're talking about, maybe with regard to, opinions with regard to, hijab, or opinions with regard to, diet, or opinions with regard to, things that are less determinative. I would say, well, we have to be very careful about how we assess religiosity or religiousness, and if we're boiling all religiousness down to like a headscarf, like this is what this comes down to. There, I would say, well, faith and the practice of faith is certainly more significant than that. And I would the way I would intervene is I would say, I would suggest, and I think it's advisable, if you're assessing this man's religious standing, I would suggest that you use criteria wider than facial hair. If you're saying, well, he can't marry my daughter because he doesn't have a beard. So, I mean, I think that there's much more to, religious standing than the fact that he doesn't have a beard. And if I knew the person, I would say that this is someone that, I've had the pleasure of sitting, in many like sessions of like religious learning with them. This is someone that I'm quite convinced of their devotion. I'm quite convinced of their commitment. I'm quite convinced of their literacy and their knowledge. They've taken a position that on this issue is not something that cannot be considered. It's not like a zero-sum kind of issue. If we're talking about a man and his facial hair, something like that, it's not a zero-sum kind of issue like that. And I really think that you're thinking about this in a wrong-headed way. And I would say the same thing about like a woman and her clothing. I would say to the family, I really think that you're thinking about this in a wrong-headed way. I think that you're giving this kind of singular priority when it doesn't. It's a value that is expressed in many different ways. And I might agree with you in terms of how I think the value should be expressed, but in terms of making it, a singular criterion upon which we judge a person to be religious or not religious, I think you'd be making a terrible mistake. This is a young woman that I have the pleasure of knowing, and I've sat in many sessions of religious learning with her, and I know of her commitment. I know of her devotion. I know of her, adherence to, the pillars of Islam, etc. And I think that to judge her religiousness on the basis of just an issue like that, I think you'd be making a terrible mistake. Yeah, that's probably how I would approach that. I don't know if that helps.
No, thanks, Ustad. That's really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think I would approach it in that, in that way. Other things as we wind down, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum again, Sheikh. Sorry.
No, why are you apologizing? There's nothing to apologize about. Wallahi.
Yeah. So I guess the difficult part for me is trying to just reconcile the realities of living out here in a majority non-Muslim country, and like the struggle. I'm mostly among sisters, and I see the struggle, and the struggle is truly fundamentally real. And I get, so like, my friends, some of them have been looking for, in earnest, looking for a husband since we've been in undergrad. And it's been maybe 10 years, 15 years of like genuine putting themselves out there, being burned like on different fronts. And and then also them finding, but never really entertaining, that they are compatible with people outside of the deen, just people that they come across in school or work, but they've never, moved forward with that. So I guess like, what, like, do we tell, I don't know, Muslim men or women, no, just settle for someone that is Muslim, but you're not compatible with, just for this?
No, I mean, certainly not, certainly not. I think, again, I would, I completely identify with that struggle. All of the qualifiers you use, I would use them twice. It is fundamentally real out here. And, I personally am even willing to say that, for someone, and I think that this changes in time. I've been around long enough to see this thing change with time. But for a lot of people, it tends to be like in their 20s and even 30s that really want romantic companionship. The idea that, you are a part of a faith community that has some rules that are frustrating your ability to experience romantic companionship, and is essentially damning you to celibacy, damning you to spinsterhood, I think that there's actually a risk of a person getting a very bad taste in their mouth about the religion itself. I think that at certain ages, companionship presents itself as being that important to us. Like, like almost like if I can't have this and be a Muslim, I don't even know if I want to be a Muslim. Astaghfirullah. I'm serious. I've seen this. I've seen it occupy that much space within the hearts and minds of young, particularly young Muslim women. So when you say the struggle is real, it is fundamentally real, realer than we can imagine. I guess what I'm saying is that this is why I made that allowance that, for an individual woman, in a circumstance where she is weighing all of this and she's considering what this means to her faith, if she decided to go with an opinion that, look, I'm going to marry this guy. He is a Muslim. I am Muslim, and this is a legitimate decision for me to make for these reasons. And, she did the painstaking task of kind of teasing out those reasons and talking with, authorities in the tradition, in the religion that, make clear for her the basis for doing it. And she's content with that decision. You will not find me saying that she has done something that is completely irreconcilable with Islam. You will not find me saying, Ubaydullah Evans, saying she has done something that has taken her out of Islam or something like that. I'm not going to say that, because I do think that the issue is complicated and complex and allows for some difference of opinion in that way. I'm willing to grant that. I'm and I actually consider myself something of a conservative textualist Islamic legal reader, meaning my read of the law is probably stricter than some people that I can imagine. So if I saw that, I'm not going to say this is something for which there's absolutely, positively no basis. No, the situation is too real for that. I wouldn't say that. My own position, however, just me, is that it's something that gives me personally, pause. Like, I just can't get past the clarity of the verse, the unanimity of classical scholars concerning the opinion. I can't get past, the possibility of kind of the collective weight of some of those reasons I was mentioning. Like, me personally, I can't get past that, but I do recognize that I'm not in the situation, right? It's not me. So from where I sit, this is the approach that's the conclusion that's where I would stop. If someone else was sitting in a different place and they made a different decision, I would be content saying that's between them and Allah. And I would really pray that Allah would accept their choice. I wouldn't want to see them punished at all, or I wouldn't think that they did something unconscionable. My own position would just be different. My own position on this one is just different. My own position, just my own personal feeling about it is something different. I totally admit and allow for different positions to be taken. So, if I'm being clear, I'm saying I do have a position, but it's not a position that doesn't allow for other positions. It's not a position that doesn't allow for other approaches. Yeah, it is so real out here, man. It is real out here. It is real, and I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that. So like beyond, like I guess that is as far as right now. That is as far as I can go. As far as I'm comfortable going right now, is I totally understand how someone could disagree with me, but I still have a position myself. If that makes any sense.
No, that does make sense. Jazakallah khair.
Right. Other ideas, positions. If not, we can end a few minutes early today, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wal asr inna al-insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Always a pleasure, mashallah. We had 23 people today, man. I don't know when we'll get back in the space, but I thank you guys so much for just, keeping this going. And you guys make sure you make dua for Randa, inshallah. She does this just out of the goodness of her heart to give us, facilitating the session and sending out the surveys and kind of filling me in on the back end, just so that we'll have an opportunity to just keep our conversation about Islam and about Allah and about Deen going. So she's the Amira. She's in charge here. I'm very happy to defer to her, and I'm very happy to be working with her. So I just humbly request that you guys make dua for her, inshallah. Look forward to seeing you guys next week. Jazakumullahu khair. Assalamu alaikum.